Hey folks, this is Soul. It's the start of 2022, and of course it is time for some 2022 predictions for the World of Warcraft. What might or might not happen? Let's have we're just gonna have some simple fun with this. Hear me out as I mouth off all sorts of possibilities, whether they are likely or ridiculous, but feel free to share your own too. Don't forget to like the video for fun, subscribe for more, and well, let's get started. I predict that Bobby Kotick is probably going to step down from Activision Blizzard by the end of this year. Now, he might still be around in a different role. Maybe he'll slowly transition out, but this dude's goose is cooked, I think. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, it's all part of his sinister plan. Now, hear me out. There's no shortage of bad press, and at the center of it is ABK's CEO. I'm obviously not a financial expert or advisor or whatever, but I think that for the sake of staying filthy rich, which is largely tied to Activision Blizzard's stock price, Kotick's best move is to lay low. In fact, it's sort of working right now, with the price of the stock being a little bit better than it was a month ago. However, it's still a pretty far cry from early pandemic levels. Eventually, though, I think he's going to dip out in the most profitable way possible, selling off shares at a high price, and hopefully will just kind of leave the company in the capable hands so his remaining investments bear fruit. Of course, again, I have almost zero knowledge about how any of this works. It would just feel really good to be right. Okay, enough of him. Let's get to World of Warcraft. Now, I predicted that patch 9.2 is going to launch late February to early March, and I still stand by that. There are major features that still aren't fully testable yet, but we're just coming back from holiday break, and there are bound to be a ton of changes to what's currently in test. For example, flying, and that whole debacle, and how things might change as I'm making this very recording. I got a feeling that requirements and the workflow to unlock it is going to change a little bit to be a little bit more friendly, but hopefully there will just be more to do with flying. I mean, Zereth noticed the zone is decently big, but if I were to compare it, it feels more like Mechagon instead of Nazjatar in terms of vertical climbs and, other roadblocks. As with everything WoW, the reaction to 9.2, it's going to be mixed. Casuals are going to have a lot to do, but they might hate that whole flying grind. Hardcore PvPers and dungeon folk and raiders, well, they're going to be pissed that there's so little to do between their main activity, but they're also going to be elated that there's so little that they have to do between their main activity. The story beats, and they're going to have their moments, but for the most part, the vocal public are just going to feel relieved that we're on our way to, sewing that Shadowlands hole shut and moving on. And Sylvanas is going to share a tender moment with Nathanos. Guaranteed. I think that game director Ian Hazzikostas' mic quality will continue to be really bad. I mean, it's bad. I'm sure there's a perfectly good reason why the quality is set to 1983, but I just wanted to add a little lighthearted prediction there. I don't see World of Warcraft doing this, but it's almost guaranteed. We're going to see Activision Blizzard exploring non-fungible tokens or NFTs in Call of Duty or something. I have no basis of this prediction other than to fill out someone's bingo card of doom and gloom. Someone's thinking this. I predict that WoW's next expansion is going to be announced within a few weeks of patch 9.2's launch. Now, I went into this with our Twitch chat for a little while. The announcement, it could be a few weeks before or after the launch of the 9.2 patch to kind of space out the hype. You know what I mean? No doubt when it is, there's going to be a huge media blast with interviews and information, but we don't want that to take away from the enjoyment of playing actual new content that is immediately available. Like I said earlier, I think 9.2 will launch late February, meaning it could only be a number of weeks before we learn about the new expansion. If it's announced after the patch, it's going to be around the same time the Sylvanas book is released, so late March. I guess what's more important is when will WoW's 9th expansion launch? Is it going to be in 2022 or 2023? My prediction, late 2022. And here's why. Once upon a time, early in the Warlords of Draenor development, someone had the bright idea of going hard into developing Legion, leaving the current expansion behind. I think the same thing happened here in Shadowlands, only with maybe a little bit better planning this time. Using recent history as an example, patch 8.3 launched the week of January 14th, and Shadowlands the week of November 23rd. That's with the 1 month delay, meaning a 10-month wait. And that's with having to deal with the awkwardness of transitioning to a work-from-home environment later in the development cycle. The upcoming expansion is being developed almost entirely in this situation, and we're seeing the WoW team kind of get used to this sort of production after seeing patch cadence improve after patch 905. I don't think it's all that unreasonable to see a similar 10-month wait. Maybe I'm being generous with my hopes here, but I'd rather be a bit disappointed later than to stay cynical for months and months. Of course, if we end up hearing about a patch 925, then all of this goes out the window. Whether we see that depends on when the team had started working on 10.0. But I'm pretty certain on this next part. Between now and the expansion's launch, Ian Hazzikostas will step down as game director. As of this video, a job for associate game director for World of Warcraft has been up, and well, actually it's been up for months. The reasons for it being up could be anything, from Ian being pushed out, to him wanting to find a successor so he can move on, to him just asking for help, meaning I'd be wrong. Some historical reference though, his predecessor Tom Chilton is credited as game director for 4 expansions, from Cataclysm to Legion. However, in late 2016, Chilton left and Ian took the reins. So far, Ian's been credited as game director for Battle for Azeroth and Shadowlands, and is likely going to get the credit for the next expansion even if he leaves towards the end of the year. But now let's get into the game side of things. When the 10.0 expansion is announced, what are we going to learn? What might we see? Where will we go? And how's it going to feel? Now this part is tricky because I'm doing predictions and not a wish list. It's just really tempting to make this a wish list, so I'm going to get this one out of the way. Player housing. More of a wish than a prediction, but please indulge my copium here. There hasn't been a peep about player housing despite our grumbling for a feature that would, in my opinion, kick off a renaissance of old content farming that we haven't seen since transmog became a thing. Obviously, hearing nothing is a bad sign, or it could be them being super tight-lipped. Maybe they're working on it but don't want to set expectations until it's totally ready to reveal and it's coming in 10.0 OMG. Can you feel the desperation in my voice at this point? Yeah. How about something more predictable then? In some way or shape or form, cross-faction content is coming to the World of Warcraft. We've heard numerous statements that the once immovable pillar, that is the faction divide, is starting to show its cracks. And I'm paraphrasing here, but basically, there's a point where the team has to choose between an iconic part of what makes the World of Warcraft the World of Warcraft and giving more opportunities for gamers to just play. Despite the protest over what's basically ending segregation in a video game, the problems from the faction divide are numerous and, in my opinion, antithetical to the WoW team's desire to make the game more inclusive and welcoming for players. Maybe they'll take it to the hilt the way that I want them to, as in cross-faction everything, from raids to guilds to communities. Maybe it'll start slow though, going in a direction that first lets players party together, regardless of race choice, and then do away with divisive features like the Hall of Fame. But I'm not alone in having this vision of races from all walks of life grouping together to wipe in Raid Finder content. And you might not like it, but if you're a goblin and you're hurting for a group and you see a gnome in the group finder willing to take you in, how long are you going to hold yourself back because you take offense to someone else's race of choice? Next, I want to predict massive changes to the dungeon and raid finder feature as a half response to Final Fantasy XIV's very decent duty finder. I'll try to explain this simply. You know how right now if you queue for a regular heroic dungeon, you're thrown into just the Shadowlands dungeons? How about this though? How about at max level, queuing up for a dungeon means that you queue for the entire game's dungeon pool. So the dungeon finder will first and foremost get players together, and then based on the party's lowest level character, you're thrown into a dungeon. This means it's going to use party sync, which means abilities and talents are going to be disabled depending on the dungeon you run into. Too bad, so sad, this is not time walking. On the other hand, maybe you can also queue for heroic versions of these dungeons, and then get thrown into Well, the heroic versions of these dungeons, and these might scale to a higher level, maybe even max level. Or if you can queue for Raid Finder, maybe you're no longer limited to just the current expansion's raids, you can queue up for like all of them, which would be awesome. It's way better than, well, I mean, okay, you could still solo them by talking to an NPC, that's not going anywhere, but it just sucks having to travel all over the planet just so you can queue up for this Raid Finder stuff. You should be able to queue up solo or in a group. I get more into this, but screw it, this is just a predictions video, and you can use your imagination. With the faction war over, at least for the moment, the premise of allied races might not make sense, but more races period would be welcome, and also expected. I don't see the Shadowlands races being a thing, but rather a more indigenous race will be introduced that's related to whatever land we're visiting, like, I don't know, Dragonkin. And while we're at it, it's been a long time since we've seen a heritage armor set and a quest line, another prediction. I bet this among many things were put on the shelf due to delays, but I can sense the WoW team is trying to play catch up. What I'd really like to see is a renewed push for customization. Like, we got some treats during Shadowlands, but there's room for a lot more. Now, while I'd love to see a fully customizable slider for things like height and body weight, I'd be happy enough to at least see a step in the direction of the obvious. For example, NPCs in Kul Tiras already use the original human models as well as the Kul Tiran models. Let's apply that to the playable human races, as in the regular humans, the Worgen, and the Kul Tirans. Let them select these different body types. I'm more than certain this has been talked about within the team. I think this just needs a little bit of a nudge to move from prediction to reality. And then throw in those thin humans as a bonus, why not? And why even stop at character customization? A lot of folks have been clamoring for something like class skins, you know, like making a Void Paladin with weird holy Void skills or something. I envision something a little bit more a la carte, like with the generous use of glyphs, which have been ignored for most classes outside of druids and warlocks. This is a pretty big ask though. It's more wish than prediction. Like, art-wise, class skins or whatever are almost the equivalent of designing new abilities, but man, that would just be super cool. Another reason why this prediction isn't as likely is because I predict that, well, after 2 expansions, I think the break's over and it's time for a new class, meaning all of the work that would go into class skins or glyphs or whatever is probably going to go right here. Classes tend to follow the expansion that they launch in, and social media has been pretty much drilling it into our heads that the next expansion will take us to the Dragon Isles, pointing out small references and shop mounts as irrefutable proof. And they might be right. Will we see a Dragonkin allied race who happens to be something like a tinker? Probably not, but I do predict that the next class, if there is one, is going to be a male class, because seriously, we've got too much of everything else. But what if it's not a class, then? That's kind of a possibility too. This is lower on the prediction scale, but it is possible that the WoW team could instead add a few specs to already existing classes. How about a priest, a mage, or a warlock tank? How about a bonafide death knight and a demon hunter caster spec? How about replacing marksman with a melee spec? That would be neat and revolutionary. Or maybe a paladin pet class. I would want the pet to literally be a shield. Like, I would try tanking in that, no hesitation. Shadowlands is going to be the 3rd time we say goodbye to a borrowed power in Covenants and Soulbinds. I predict that somehow, someway, Soul Shape will become a baseline ability for all players in the General tab, or maybe as a toy, but only usable in rested areas. This way we get to enjoy the cool little shapes that we've been collecting for the past year and, well, way too long. I guess more importantly though, I wouldn't be surprised if at least a few Covenant abilities made their way into classes' spellbooks or even talent trees. Less likely though would be like an entire talent row for all classes dedicated to the 4 Covenant abilities, but you know, you'd love to see it. And we'd have all sorts of conflicts if we did get a new class that didn't have these Covenant abilities, but oh well. We'd probably see a massive nerf to some of these abilities like Ashen Hollow as well, but the general takeaway, I just predict that there's going to be something big along the lines of a new class or a spec or a big revamp to class agency. And then finally in this rant, let's move on to plot. There are a few popular schools of thoughts for WoW's next expansion. Like, first, I already mentioned the Dragon Isles, a place where adventurers will visit in search of ways to I don't know, heal the planets, as in, that big freaking sword that's been stuck in its backside for a few years now. There's also the idea of a second cataclysm, where in this scenario, the Shadowlands storyline happens to end with the jailer actually winning, causing Azeroth to be warped along with the rest of reality and causing some sort of soft reset. Or we might just move straight to the next thing, Light versus Void, featuring Turalyon and Ilaria. This could be a main story or a second arc, kind of like how Battle for Azeroth had the Faction War arc and the Old God arc. And then there's what others like me hope for, where we slam the brakes on all these different plot threads, for now at least, where our champions learn of, some new thing in a faraway land and they just go. They leave everything behind for a few years to go off on new exploits while the rest of Azeroth recovers from a decade of conflict. They rebuild stuff, they repopulate, and all that. Unfortunately, World of Warcraft's story has been on this very predictable and very upward course for years. Now, I want a break from the escalation, and I'd like to think that Shadowlands marks the end of this wild and crazy saga. But it's safer to predict that we're just going to move on to the big bad behind the big bad. I just hope I'm wrong. There's a lot more that I could add to the list, but this topic ain't just about me sharing. I'd like to hear from you folks. What are your predictions? Anything goes. You can be as hopeful or as cynical as you like. Everyone's welcome. About everything that we say here is also going to be super wrong, at least to some degree. But I want to thank you for sharing your time with me. I hope that it was fun, and if so, smash the like button, sub for more content, and I'll see you next time. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.